My husband and I, on paper, look like two people that would never be together. He's got wild long hair covered in tattoos, with a long beard, and plays guitar in a local rock band. I, on the other hand, am a nurse with no piercings, and I don't enjoy rock music at all. But love is quite funny that way, and you can't help who you fall for. That defines our relationship perfectly. Every year, a tattoo convention comes through our town, and since we started dating, he's been asking me to go. Every time, I've always been able to get out of it. Every year, but last year, I couldn't really find an excuse. I finally decided to just go to the convention with him. Right away, this place was completely not my scene. It was loud, and the people there were, let's just say, aggressive. He was in his full glory, though, and ended up seeing one of his oldest friends that he had lost touch with. It turns out the guy had become a tattoo artist in another state and just so happened to have a booth at this convention. Long story short, he agreed to tattoo my husband for free. My husband wanted to show it off later in the evening at the tattoo competition they held every year. Well, I wasn't just going to sit at the booth for 4 hours while my husband was getting his new tattoo done. I decided to just walk around and pretend like I belonged here. I'm not even going to lie, though. I really had no idea what was going on at all. I did end up meeting some really cool people, though, and seeing some awesome tattoos. The artist I liked handed me cards, and I put them in my bag so I could show my husband later how amazing some of these artists were. At some point during the night, I was starting to get a bit warm, so I went outside to get some air. While I was sitting on the stone wall outside, I noticed this woman running under the tree line that was directly across from me, nervously jogging through the parking lot. I watched this woman because she looked really freaked out, and I was genuinely worried for her safety. A minute later, she was already gone. Nobody ever came out of the forest behind her or anything, so I assumed maybe the woman was just partying extra hard, if you know what I mean. After a few minutes, I went back into the venue and checked on my husband, who was about 50% done with his tattoo. I sat around for a while, then started to walk around the scene again. As I walked around the convention, I noticed this side door that was open. It led to a dark hallway, it seemed. As I got closer, I noticed something a little further down it. I saw the girl I had just seen outside. She was sitting on the ground in that back room and looked borderline unconscious. I went over to see if she needed help. When I got close, though, she jumped up and hit me with a large blunt object. I'm pretty sure it was some sort of pipe. I fell to the ground, and the woman got right in my face and just screamed at me. I stayed down, pretending like I was actually hurt. She ran out of the dark hall and into the convention center. I got up a few seconds later and started making my way back to my husband and his friend's booth. I was clenched over in pain, but I guess nobody really noticed, probably because they figured I'd just gotten a big tattoo or something. When I got back to them, I finally started to freak out. I was able to keep my composure until that moment. Well, once my husband saw the pain I was in, the waterworks started in full force. They put the tattoo on hold and immediately notified the security the venue had hired for the event. The security then notified the police as well. When they showed up, I told them all about the interaction with that woman. Unfortunately, the description of that woman was nearly identical to every single other woman that was at this event. Thankfully, the venue did have some cameras, and they were able to pull up the feed and find the woman relatively easily. It was haunting watching the footage back. It was like the clearest day. You could see the woman strike me on the head. In the same footage after she hit me, she ran to the parking lot and tried to open numerous car doors. She was walking down the line of parked cars, pulling on every handle. Finally, she found a car with the door unlocked. She opened the door and just sat there in the back seat. She wasn't hiding or anything either. She was just sitting there in the back seat like a passenger of the vehicle. The police and security checked the live feed, and sure enough, the woman was still in that person's car. They ran out and detained the woman immediately. She seemed to put up very little struggle when they were arresting her. They did find a knife in her back pocket. I'm glad I found out like that and never had to find out the hard way about that knife. It gives me chills. What if she intended on using that knife for the owner of the vehicle? They notified the driver of that vehicle, and more disturbingly, the owner had never seen that woman before. She was indeed just trying to find any unlocked car. It was clear this woman was not in the right state of mind. I'm not sure what happened to her. I hope she got the help she clearly needed, because I don't think she was evil or malicious or anything. I just think she had some demons that got the better of her that night. Thankfully, nobody besides me got hurt that evening, and if I didn't take that shot to the head, someone else may have gotten far more seriously injured than I. This may sound weird, but I met my eventual husband on Xbox Live on the Xbox 360. We started playing Halo together after just randomly being on a team one time. That formed into a friendship, which eventually led to a romance that led to marriage. I know for a lot of people that's crazy, and life usually isn't that fair, but I guess I'm really lucky. He was exactly the man I thought he was and not some serial killer or catfish or something. We actually had a Halo-themed wedding as well. Every year we traveled down to the city to attend a massive video game convention. It reminded us of our love and how far we had come together. The conventions weren't just Xbox or Microsoft related. Having Halo present was definitely a plus for us, though. It was something we looked forward to every year, and it's something we still continue to do together and will do so for as long as we can. One time, though, a few years ago, we almost had to stop going to conventions altogether. The day started just like every other convention he and I had ever gone to. Loads of fun, buying souvenirs, attending live talks, and meeting awesome like-minded folks. During one of the talks, they set up microphones at the end of the aisles, and you can wait in line and ask questions to the guest speaker. My husband really wanted to ask a question, so he got in line while I waited in our seat. I was mostly just listening to the other people's questions and enjoying myself quite a bit. That was when I noticed just about the worst thing I could possibly ever see. Sitting about 10 feet away from me in another row was my ex-boyfriend. We'd broken up 10 years ago for many different reasons. The Cliff Notes version was that he was an abusive and trolling man. I just tried to pretend like I'd never seen him and started looking the other direction. When I glanced back, though, he was very clearly staring at me. I could feel his eyes penetrating me. It was the most uncomfortable feeling I had ever felt. I was scared to get up and leave the convention hall because I thought he might try to follow me. I also didn't want to say or do anything because I didn't want to bring unwanted attention to the situation. After all he was doing was staring at me and not doing anything harmful, really. I guess. It took about 15 minutes for my husband to get to the front of the line, but when he finally did, I recorded his question. After that little interaction, he came back to his seat, but he could tell something was off with me. He didn't know what, and I didn't want to tell him about my ex because I thought it might make him uncomfortable. We eventually left the talk and started doing other activities around the convention. I noticed, though, that every few minutes I would now see my ex wandering around somewhere near us. It was making me grow increasingly uneasy. Finally, my husband asked what was going on because it got to the point where I was giving him one-word answers and was more focused on keeping an eye on my ex than I was in the actual conversation. I decided to tell him everything and pointed out where he was hiding. I basically told him how horrible of a man that guy was and most likely still is, since it seemed he was now trying to follow me. I forget how amazing my husband is sometimes, honestly. I thought it would make him uncomfortable, but instead, he completely understood and asked if I wanted to leave early. I didn't, but at the same time, I wanted to just get away from that man. We decided to just leave. As we were walking to the car, my head almost felt like a bobblehead. I was looking all around, trying to keep an eye on him. That's when I realized I hadn't seen him in over 15 minutes, and I felt my first wave of relief in the last few hours. We got in the car and started the somewhat long drive home. On the highway, there was a lot of traffic, but once we got off of it, there was no traffic at all, except for one car following us. Now, ordinarily, this wouldn't really be an issue, but the car following us was following very closely. They had their high beams on the entire time too. We tried to remain calm, thinking perhaps it was just some coincidence, but he wouldn't try to pass us at all, and if we sped up, so did he. I was convinced this tailgater was my ex. My husband tried to comfort me by telling me not to jump to conclusions. Surely it could have been anyone. We didn't want to head right home and have the car follow us there, though, so we decided to pull into the lot of a 24-hour gas station. It was about a mile away from our home. As we turned in, they did as well. We parked, and they stopped right behind us, making it impossible to back out of the spot even if we wanted to. We were trying to look into the windows of the vehicle, but the windows were too tinted, and we couldn't make out the driver. I pulled out my phone and finally called the police, something I should have done a while ago. A minute or two later, the vehicle drove off, thankfully in the opposite direction of our home. About 10 minutes later, the police arrived, and we described the vehicle. I told them about my ex. They didn't seem too concerned, though, basically just told me I couldn't accuse him without any concrete proof, even though deep down I knew it was him. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I got 3 phone calls from a restricted number in the middle of the night. Every vehicle light that drove by our house that night made me grip the sheets in fear. Luckily, the lights always passed by without further incident. I know he doesn't know where I live, but it's an irrational fear of mine. I know this story is perhaps more creepy than outright terrifying, but just put yourself in our shoes. We were terrified for our lives if it truly was my ex tailgating us. I'm happy we were able to get away and that I'm able to write this story at all. This might go without saying, but in order to protect the privacy of myself and my family, I'm going to refrain from using any real names or locations in this story, just in case. Last year, my town hosted a Comic-Con event. My wife and I decided to go since we had talked about it for years. We found a babysitter for our 2 small children and decided to just enjoy the night. Just to clear up one thing, by the way, this wasn't like San Diego Comic-Con or anything. It was a much smaller event since the city I live in is much smaller than San Diego, obviously. Me and my wife decided to dress up as characters from the Marvel movies. I know a lot of people these days are somewhat annoyed with the franchise, but it's something my wife and I really bond over. They'll always have a special place in my heart. I was dressed up as Captain America, and my wife was dressed up as Gamora, a character from Guardians of the Galaxy, in case you didn't know. Since my wife designs costumes for a living, our outfits were top-notch. The event was having a costume contest for everyone cosplaying, so we decided to enter. I thought one of us was going to win for sure. That was until I saw the dozens of other incredible costumes during the competition. We spent a lot of time hanging out with the fellow contestants and actually met another couple who were wearing costumes from the Marvel movies as well. In no time at all, we were being our dorky selves, and I was making everyone laugh. My wife ended up finishing second in the competition to one of the most amazing and ridiculous Sapo costumes I'd ever seen. Even though the rest of us lost, we all had our fun, and the 4 of us continued to hang out for the majority of the evening. As the night progressed, I noticed the man of the couple was starting to act a little bit weird. I mentioned it once to my wife, who told me it was just my imagination and that I needed to stop worrying so much since I tend to worry quite a lot. I agreed and went back to trying to have a good time. When my wife mentioned to them that we were thinking about leaving soon, they both got really upset and insisted that we hang out for a while longer. My wife told them we had 2 small children at home and that we needed to get ready to leave right now. I remember getting visibly annoyed with the man because he kept saying the kids would be fine for just a while longer and to all grab a drink together. Clearly, this man did not have small children or any children of his own. At this point in the evening, I just wanted to get home. My wife, being the smooth-talking diplomat that she was able to communicate to these 2 that we had to leave right now, and it was not something personal. We were having a really great time. Good thing for her because I would have probably handled their pushy behavior in a much more toxic way. Finally, we left and made our drive home. The weird and uncomfortable final minutes with those 2 didn't cast a bad shadow over the entire convention. We had an awesome time, took fun pictures and videos, and most importantly, we made some awesome memories together. We got home, paid the babysitter, and put the kids to bed since they were still awake and waiting for us when we got back. Then we got into bed as well. We decided to watch the first Avengers movie. As a side note, that movie was our first date, hence why we have such a special place in our hearts for Marvel. We both fell asleep at some point during the movie. In the middle of the night, though, my wife woke me up, claiming she had heard someone knocking on the door. I thought for sure it was just her imagination, but I went and checked anyway. As I was walking to the front door with my wife standing right behind me, someone knocked on the door again. Before checking to see who was outside, I briefly glanced at the time. I saw it was already 3 o'clock in the morning. Right away, I was completely freaked out. I approached the door and shouted, "Who is it?" There was a small pause, then a confident and upbeat voice could be heard from the other side. "How do you do, Cap? You guys ready for that drink yet?" We both looked at each other. The voice was obvious. It was clearly the acquaintance we'd made at the convention. I opened the front door, but not the glass door in front of it, which was still locked. As soon as I opened the front door, he tried to grab at the glass door. Thankfully, as I said before, it was locked. He took a step back quickly and asked if we were ready to hang out. I was firm and angry and told them in so many words to get the hell off our property. If I ever saw them again, I would call the cops immediately. They walked away smiling, shaking their heads, as if there was some crazy surprise that I had flipped out on them. We got back into bed, and my wife thought I should have called the cops. I didn't want to bother at that point. They left, so I assumed my tone was enough to get the message across. I couldn't have been more wrong. I fell back asleep not long after the ordeal, but my wife was wide awake about an hour later. She started to tap my shoulder, claiming she could hear something from outside the bedroom. Again, I got up and opened the door, expecting to see nothing there. Instead, standing at the end of the hall was the couple from the convention. They were in my home, standing there and still wearing their Marvel superhero costumes. Instinctively, I pushed my wife back into the room and shut the door. I ran across the hall and closed the door of my kids' bedroom as well. While that was happening, the two were walking down the hall towards me. Thankfully, my wife's phone was in the bedroom. While I was holding my kids' bedroom door shut, my wife called the police. I could hear one of them trying to open the door to the room that I was in, the other was trying to open the other bedroom door my wife was in. Thank God the cops showed up very quickly, and neither one of them resisted. They were still smiling and laughing even while they were being dragged away by the police. I'm not sure if these monsters were on some sort of drug or just outright evil. As you would expect, they were both charged, and last I knew, they're both still behind bars. That's something I can't 100% confirm though. The one thing that kills me though is that I have no idea why these two did this. What did they want? They never said why they terrorized us nor what their intentions were in the first place. The entire evening, they seemed like really great and fun individuals for the most part. I don't know what clicked in their heads to make them snap like they did. I'm thankful our children were young enough that they don't seem to remember that night at all, and I'm hoping nothing like that ever happens again. A couple of years ago, one of my closest friends relocated cross-country with his long-term girlfriend to take a job he couldn't refuse. Only issue he had was that he didn't want to fly his dogs out with him when they made the move. They'd be staying in a hotel for the first month of their stay. He was also a bit hesitant to fly them out for health concerns for both pets. By the time he'd located a home to rent, he was really missing them though, and made a request of his sister, another close friend, and myself to drive them to him in LA. We're all Chicago folks, so the trip would be quite a long one with the three of us to foot the nearly 30-hour drive. Though surely it would be a piece of cake, we left early and drove long hours. Along the way, it was decided between my friend and me that we'd do the majority of the drive ourselves, and if we needed to, we would let the friend's sister do some driving as well. We were on a bit of a time crunch due to a snafu with the rental agreement, so we didn't have the luxury to stop very often. past an 8-hour stay in Denver, the rest of the journey itself was relatively smooth, barring getting pulled over right before entering Utah for driving 2 miles in the left lane of an empty highway. From that point, we made it through Utah, Arizona, and Nevada without any further trouble. That is until we entered California. We were in need of gas, and I had been driving for the majority of the first day. I tagged my buddy in after being pulled over, and I remained in the shotgun seat as the navigator, searching through the GPS for a fuel stop. I found a sign pointing to Yermo Ghost Town, which had a mobile gas station. How wonderful! It was convenient and located almost directly off the interstate. We rolled in on a little more than fumes. When we approached the pumps, normally we would let the dogs out at every rest stop, but having stopped not long before and with both dogs sleeping snugly in the back seat, I decided to pump gas without anyone else leaving the vehicle. My buddy pulled up on the opposite side of a beat-up green sedan where a short, plump gentleman had just turned in to approach the shop. I noticed a few other hoop ties at the pumps, all unoccupied. There were a couple of cars parked up near the station, most likely belonging to the employees. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. That is until I swiped my credit card, and the pump rejected my swipe attempt. I chalked it up to a misread, so I swiped again. The pump now read, "Please see the attendant." I was quite annoyed, but we really needed the gas. I tapped on the window and told my buddy what I was doing. I asked if anybody needed anything. After taking their orders for Gatorade and Marlboros, I walked up to the store. I made a mental note of how strange this gas station was. It was eerily quiet, especially for one just off the interstate. That was no matter really. As I walked through the gas station, though, there was more weirdness. The first thing I noticed in the store was that there were boxes of chips just left on the floor, like someone was in the middle of restocking the shelves and then just quit. As I veered to my right, I noticed that there was no one else walking around in this place either. With the 6 cars beside my own out there, I felt like I would see somebody at least. Things got even weirder when I realized there was nobody behind the counter, no customers, no workers. Then it dawned on me, what happened to the gentleman who was just leaving the pump adjacent to mine? Surely, they can't all be in the bathroom. I began to have the gnawing sensation in my stomach that something was not right. I've always been a person who felt like I could trust my instincts, and those instincts were screaming at me to get the hell out of here. I wanted to run, but I thought I would look suspicious bolting it out of the station that was empty. So, I decided to play it cool and natural. Don't let your body language let on how badly you're freaking out in your head. I was probably only inside that station for a couple of minutes. I left, but stopped just before exiting to listen in for anything. A flushing toilet even would have been a good sound, but there was no noise at all. As I exited the shop and saw my car, I began to feel a dread. It's like that moment in a movie where the hero is about to make it to the end of their trial, but the celebratory fanfare disappears, and in that silence, something comes and strikes them down. I was about 25 yards from the car when I noticed a gentleman coming from around the side of the shop opposite of me. This was not the same man I'd seen earlier. He was quite large and had a peculiar look on his face. The best way I can describe it was like a crazy Nick Cage smile. I continued walking towards my car. When I turned back to look at him, he was now walking towards me fast and with purpose. At this point, I hopped my way back to the car with increased urgency in my step. Of course, my friend had the door locked. There was also the 95-pound golden retriever sitting in my seat. Apparently, my travel companions had not noticed how terrified I was nor the creepy man directly beelining in our direction. I punched the window and told him to unlock the door right now. He only halfway rolled down the window to tell me the dog was in my seat. They were afraid she would jump out when I opened the door. I reached my hand in and threw the dog towards the back seat as hard as I could. My friends were just now realizing how scared I was. He started the car and drove off quickly. I took one last look back and saw the man had stopped about a pump away from where we were, still with that same eerie look on his face. We found another gas station further down the road, this time with a ton of people inside and out. After thoroughly being creeped out and pumping the gas, we made our way back to the interstate, which meant passing that gas station again. It had been about 30 minutes since we'd pulled out. Initially, we went silent as we noticed those very same cars were sitting in the same spots before we had left them. After freaking out for a few minutes, I received a phone call from my credit card company about a $100 charge at a mobile station. The lady on the phone was really helpful in fixing the situation for me and was entirely creeped out by the situation. In the end, we made it to LA just fine and had a great vacation there. It still bothers me though, what the hell was going on at that little gas station off the highway? What was with that smiling man? Before we start, when this happened, I was an 11-year-old male in 5th grade. For some background, my bus stop is right across the street from my house and also a few streets away from the tennis club of which I am a member. Okay, now to the story itself. I was getting ready for school and walked out to my bus stop. No one else was there, so I figured they'd all probably already gotten rides to school. My parents had. I've been letting me go alone to the bus stop for about a year now, but after this incident, I don't really want to anymore. I was standing outside just kind of looking around when, about 100 yards away, I saw something quite odd. I shook it off though since I couldn't quite tell what it was. I looked again a bit later, trying to observe it even closer. That was when I noticed that staring at me 100 yards away was a clown head tilted and just plain creepy looking. I'll also mention that this was in the direction of the tennis club. I ran back to my house right away, and when I say ran, I mean I could have won a gold medal in the Olympics with how fast I was running. I ran to my mom, panting and crying when I reached the front porch. I could see that whoever that was had run off towards the tennis club. Luckily, my mom walked out with me and stayed there. I had tennis lessons after school, and believe me, I did not want to go at all. I was afraid the clown would be at the tennis courts. Tennis was pretty great though. I had almost forgotten about the incident earlier, except when leaving the club, I saw that very same clown hiding at the edge of the woods next to the outdoor tennis courts. I didn't tell my mom at the time. I figured she wouldn't really believe me. I mean, who would? Fast forward 2 weeks. My mom was taking a walk while I was home alone when I happened to peer outside because I had a weird feeling. I saw a clown walking up and down my street. He was walking the length of my house and side yard over and over and looked like he was planning something. I shook it off, even though I was honestly really scared. About 40 seconds later, I heard a knock at the door. Just one knock, though. I saw the clown walk back out onto the road. He then walked up the hill and disappeared out of sight. I called my mom and told her about everything. In just 5 minutes, she was already home, and I was screaming and crying. I was very happy when she arrived, but I was still very scared as well. I told everyone, my principal, even the school officer, got involved, but they found nothing. Later that night, after the knock on the door, I told my dad as well. Of course, he didn't believe me, and I hadn't expected him to. But my mom convinced him to listen to my story. I've never stayed home alone since, and I'm still very scared of that mystery clown. I told my friends at the bus stop about this too, just in case they were in danger as well. We even started a crime watch in the neighborhood because of this. I still walk out without my parents every now and then, but only when my friends are also at the bus stop as well. Back in 2013, I had one particular friend I used to hang out with every day during the summer. I would go to her place even more often and hung out with her and her roommate all the time. It was a hot summer's day, and I was walking to my friend's place. I remember I was feeling a bit angry for whatever reason. While walking, I noticed a silver car passing me by. I glanced over out of curiosity and saw an older man in his 60s seemingly checking me out. Needless to say, I was furious. I turned my head back around to focus on where I was walking and tried my best to ignore this man. I turned the corner, and out of habit, I looked back behind me. I saw the silver car's reverse lights. I remember thinking that he was probably coming back to confront me, but I didn't really care. I continued walking without a single worry in the world. Because of my paranoia, though, I peeked over my shoulder every so often and saw that the man was driving behind me very, very slowly, occasionally parking to the side of the road to get some distance and not raise any suspicions. Again, I didn't really know what to think of this. I actually kind of chuckled a bit to myself. What is this old guy thinking? Is he trying to scare me? I continued on my walk and turned my cell phone camera on, activating the front camera. I tried to act dumb and pretend I had no idea he was following me, but I had my eyes on him. I kept walking, using my front-looking camera to look behind me. He was following me slowly, parking to the side of the road over and over again. I was now close to my friend's house, though. I thought of leading him there, then calling her to come down with her 3 massive dogs and scare him away. I thought it might not be such a good idea to lead a possibly deranged man to my friend's house, though, so I thought of calling the cops instead. I wasn't sure what street I was on, though, nor did I want to give this creep more time to decide what to do, whatever sick things he had planned in his mind. The police were going to take a while to get there. I casually looked behind me once more, pretending I was just checking my surroundings and that I had not noticed him following me. When I took another look at the car, though, I noticed there were now 2 men inside, the older man and another man who looked to be in his mid to late 40s. I was now infuriated. I had many thoughts running through my mind. Should I call my friend and tell her to meet me with the dogs? Should I call the cops? None of this appealed to me. I was too angry. I wanted to let them know I was onto them. In a split-second decision, I took off the backpack I was carrying, grabbed my hairspray, and turned around. I marched toward the car as angry as ever. For some reason, I thought I could hurt them with my hairspray. When they saw my angry face speed walking towards their car while looking straight into their eyes, they must have been caught supremely off guard. They actually had a shocked and scared expression on their faces. Their car shot into full-speed reverse and drove down into a side street. I had no time to take down their license plate. I went to my friend's house and called the police shortly after. After I was done explaining everything to my friend of what had happened, an officer came and asked me more questions about the men. They also asked about the make and year of his car. Unfortunately, I didn't know much about any of that. All I'd noticed was the color. The cop told me they would patrol the area and let me know if anything ever came up. Unfortunately, nothing ever did. I never saw that piece of crap again. At the time, I kind of wished I did because I would have loved to beat his head into a pulp or at least take down their license plate number. This story happened to me surrounding my job. I haven't told this one to anybody in a while because it's been so long since it happened, but I remember it being one of the most terrifying moments of my entire life. I was 17. I remember it was fall because I had a hoodie on over my work uniform. I didn't have a car at the time, so once in a while, when I couldn't cop a ride, I ended up having to walk a couple of miles to make it to work. This particular morning was one of those times. The walk was pretty normal, kind of nice actually. That time of morning, most people were already at work, so the streets were kind of empty and quiet. I remember thinking it was really nice out, a nice temperature, the beautiful falling leaves. I enjoyed the thought of not seeing many people on my walk. I had gone about a mile or so when I saw a man just up ahead, carrying a 6-pack and standing in the dead center of the sidewalk. I thought this sight was a little bit weird for this time of day, but honestly, I was more upset about having to walk around him than I was about him being there at all. As I approached, he noticed me as well. He stared at me as I walked closer, not even pretending to look away. I started to get a little bit anxious, actually, but I didn't really have any extra time to mess around. I figured I'd ignore him if he tried talking to me. Once I was within earshot, he smiled, and I braced myself. I remember thinking that I was too tired to be dealing with any catcalling. As I walked around him, he started walking to keep pace with me. That's when I started to freak out a little. I wanted to put on a brave face, so I refused to look at or acknowledge him, looking forward. I tried to keep a neutral expression as if him stumbling along beside me didn't faze me at all. He started talking to me. "Hey honey, where are you going?" His breath reeked, and I could tell he was probably dead drunk. Up close, I noticed he was dirty, his hair was greasy, and his beard was scraggly. It looked like he had been living out of a dumpster. I kept my eyes ahead of me. "I'm going to work," I mumbled, picking up the pace a bit. He kept on walking beside me. "Oh, do you work close by?" When I didn't answer, he continued on his own, "Because I live here. Do you want to come to my place maybe and party with me instead?" I shook my head. I could feel his eyes scanning over my body. His voice was a low whisper at this point, and I was starting to panic. "Yeah, you can come with me. We'll have lots of fun. I'll pay you after we're done, if that's what you want," he murmured. At this point, I was almost in tears. I did the only thing that seemed logical. I booked it. It was not a full-on sprint, but it was fast enough to catch him off guard and get myself somewhere safe. I found myself now desperately wishing there were other people around. I looked over my shoulder to see the man running after me. He was still a little bit unsteady on his feet, though. I was terrified. I'm not very quick, and I didn't know if him being drunk would be enough of a handicap for me to escape. I made it around the corner, and up ahead, I saw a woman step out of the bus stop. I looked behind me again to see if he was still chasing me. I looked. Just in time to see him wipe out on one of the uneven pieces of the sidewalk and crack his head on the corner of the curb. He rolled out onto the street with his beer and didn't get up. I was too shaken and angry to really care, though. I slowed my pace, and once I got up to the woman near the bus stop, she smiled at me, saying something about how he dropped his beer. I didn't reply to her. I walked the rest of the way back to work, looking over my shoulder now and then. To this day, I wonder what happened to that guy. Was he dead? Did he wake up in the middle of the street sometime later and wander off to find someone else to party with? I guess I'll never know.